TellyCast.
We're back in Cannes for the Lions this week as the world's advertising and media industries took over the city for the Festival of Creativity. My guests are James McDonald, Director of Data Intelligence and Forecasting for WARC, the World Advertising Research Centre, and Carlotta Rossi Spencer, Banijay Group's Head of Branded Content Business. It's coming up on this week's TellyCast. So the dust has settled on another Cannes Lions event, the biggest event in the media and advertising industry calendar. The super yachts were full to bursting, the beach installations stretched from the Palais to the Miramar, and superstars such as Foo Fighters, Spike Lee, A$AP Rocky and Rihanna were out on the Croisette. Cannes Lions is known for its largesse, and there's certainly no sign of the advertising industry crisis currently gripping TV land. So on this week's show, I'm chatting to two execs who are in Cannes for their take on the current ad crisis and what the future holds for brand-funded content and advertising as a whole. My first guest this week is James McDonald, Director of Data Intelligence and Forecasting for the World Advertising Research Centre. Welcome to TellyCast, James.
Great to be here.
A slightly left-of-centre guest, if you don't mind me saying, for us on TellyCast. Obviously, our main audience is TV industry execs, but we're seeing more and more how the ad crisis is starting to affect producers and the industry as a whole in various different countries. And many businesses are starting to suffer now from huge reductions in content being commissioned, mainly unscripted content so far. In the UK, for example, we've seen Channel 4 postpone and even cancel productions and shunt them into the far distance. And we're hearing similar stories from producers in other parts of the world. So I'm really delighted you can join us. So first of all, tell us about WARC, what you do and who you work for.
Sure. So WARC WARC are the experts in advertising effectiveness. So we publish best practice pieces, case studies, thought leadership from successful campaigns all over our industry. We've been doing this for about 4 decades now. And so there is a very rich database behind the insight that we offer. And on my side of the business, I'm primarily focused in the quant side of our industry. So I charged with measuring advertising investment in 100 different markets worldwide across a variety of different media and different product sectors. We also monitor consumption as well as costs. So all of this helps us and our clients to paint a picture of changing dynamics within the advertising and media space, both today and also tomorrow, using our forecasting capabilities.
You've got some fascinating data when it just over in the last 5 years and looking 5 years into the future when it comes to, how COVID affected things and where we are now and where we're going in the future. So, and we'll come to that in a sec. So before we do that, what did you make of this year's Cannes Lions?
I think the feeling was very positive. There was a lot of buoyancy, which is fantastic. But I think there's also certainly still an appetite for proving effectiveness within advertising. So at WARC, for example, we had a content track within the main programming agenda called Creative Impact. And this was a series of sessions which basically joined the dots between good creative and effective results. We know within our industry at large that CFOs are asking more searching questions of their CMOs. That's always going to happen when economic conditions weaken or dampen. Searching questions are going to be asked within organizations. And we are hearing that across the industry. So there is, as I say, that kind of amplified appetite to show how this great creative work is impacting the bottom line. So I think that was a theme under the surface, along with all the usual stuff around how AI is going to take over all of our jobs, or perhaps not.
Yes, yeah, well, it's affecting everybody in every different sector, and that's probably one for another show. So let's not go down that particular rabbit hole this week. But we're all aware of the recession, cost of living crisis, energy costs spiraling, and other effects on the global economy. Can you help us understand what the latest trends are driving the advertising market right now?
Sure. So inflation is obviously a big one, and it's a double whammy for our industry, really, because it squeezes consumers, less disposable income to buy products, but also to subscribe to video services, for example. But it also impacts media buyers. So the cost of actually buying advertising space is rising dramatically. So just to put that into context, linear TV costs globally over the past 3 years have been up by 15% and will be up by 14.2% this year alone. So that isn't really sustainable. It effectively means that the ad budgets aren't working as hard, money isn't going as far, buyers are getting less for the same amount of money. So that puts a lot of strain on margins of companies of all sizes, which can lead to reduced investment. How that equates to total investment at a global level, linear TV spend is set to fall by about 7.4% this year, still to a total of 143 billion. So still a substantial part of the market. In fact, a fifth of the total advertising market still. So a good chunk there. But this downward trend has been ongoing. In fact, linear TV spend has only risen once in the last 10 years, and that was in 2021 during the COVID recovery. To be fair, it would be wrong to focus purely on linear TV when talking about television. As we all know, the market is undergoing a renaissance. And connected TV, particularly around fast services and other OTT services, is a growing portion of the market, by and large offsetting a lot of the linear decline. So there is this transitional aspect. To a smaller degree, we saw it, or we're still seeing it in the out-of-home market, where the sector is moving from traditional billboards and traditional posters to digital billboards and all the benefits that can bring, particularly around programmatic purchasing and all of that good stuff. So that's obviously can be considered a microcosm of what's happening in the TV industry, where the linear investment and indeed viewing is shifting more towards CTV services.
So you say that the cost of linear advertising or linear TV advertising has risen. You said it's about 15% overall over the last year or so. What's driving that cost increase? Because for me, audiences are falling. People are starting to, as you just mentioned, tune out of linear services and adopt other video services. So why is advertising costs going up?
A number of factors, really. As always, there's a cocktail of issues going on here, and it will vary by market. Production costs have risen in line with, a lot of companies' overheads. So I think that's a big part of it in our sector. And also, competition for inventory is still pretty high, particularly within, sectors like retail, who are still very big spenders on television, as well as financial and automotive. So there is still demand there from brands for that inventory, and this kind of compounds to raise costs. I think, one thing that is constant about television, and regardless of the form that it takes, whether it's linear or whether it's delivered, via a connected television, it still offers a brand safe environment. That there's very little to no chance of brand messaging appearing alongside negatively adjacent content, poor content, as you may find online. There's also very little fraud within the industry. There is some examples of it within CTV, but by and large, it's a very safe bet for brands to reach the consumer. And that's been a constant throughout TV. So I think, that's why the medium still resonates for the majority of advertisers, and that's why they're still willing to compete for inventory. But yes, that is driving up costs along with the production costs.
And overall, TV is still the media of choice, if you like, for FMCG brands, for example, and some of the biggest advertising sectors. Why is TV still the favourite ad media of choice?
It works. It's impactful, especially when the campaign is done right. We know that emotion is a very effective device to use within advertising, and TV delivers emotion very, very well. If you just need to think about Christmas ads and the cut through during that period, to get good examples of that. Also, among people that watch TV, viewing is down mildly but relatively stable. So an example of that is among all adults who watch television, they're typically consuming about 2 hours of TV a day. And that's only down by about 8 or 9 minutes since 2019, since before the COVID outbreak. So the viewers that are watching television are still engaged with television. So I think that's an important part of it. But it's true that reach is dwindling on linear TV and shifting over to CTV. I think the really interesting future for television is its ability to connect viewers to the point of purchase. So typically TV is currently used quite effectively in some cases with mobile. A lot of people use their mobile phones or in some cases their laptops and tablets while watching television. So having a link up between the ad that's being shown and then the ads that are being delivered on the mobile is a common tactic, and it can be used to great effect. I think when we start seeing CTV becoming the predominant strand of premium video, if you like, ahead of linear TV. That's when things will get really interesting, because obviously you can start to deliver ads programmatically and really refine the targeting of that ad via the TV set. And then I think a later iteration, we're not quite there yet, perhaps in the next 4 to 5 years, that hyper targeting of TV advertising could then translate into in-ad purchasing. So you could see how that could benefit FMCG, for example, showing a product on the connected television and then giving the viewer the option to buy that product in ads. So I think the link between TV being a kind of active on the path to purchase, or more active on the path to purchase, is an evolution that we're going to see over the coming years. And I think that's going to be to great benefit of a number of players in that space.
Does that mean in the short term we're going to see more and more QR codes in ads? Is, on this very basic level, is that what we're going to start seeing?
Quite possibly. I think in the short term there's going to be a lot of test and learn, as is always the case with new tech. And I think, one of the biggest barriers to this transition would be achieving a continuity within measurement metrics. So we know within CTV there isn't yet a common currency for viewing metrics and ad viewability in the same way that there is for legacy and established media. So that's true of pretty much any nascent format, particularly online. There's always a scramble to try and set up the framework for measuring the effectiveness of this stuff, and the jury's still out on that one with CTV. So that hurdle needs to be overcome and universally adopted across the industry before I think CTV can really flourish. And then, so yes, to your point, I think in the short term there's going to be a lot of testing and learning among brands and vendors to see exactly what sticks.
You mentioned earlier on fast channels, and that's something that's really been a hot topic this year in particular within the TV industry. We've seen lots of IP owners starting their own channels and becoming essentially direct-to-consumer businesses. So we've had, some of the world's biggest production companies and distribution companies launching fast channels and monetizing some of their old catalog that's not really getting aired on linear TV anywhere around the world. So they're starting to realize some value from some of their back catalog shows. I don't know how many are launching every week, but there's a lot of channels launching, and one reasonable size IP owner could very easily launch 20 channels in a week, for example, whether it's channel dedicated to a particular show or a particular genre. It could be true crime, could be quiz shows, etc. Those areas in particular seem to be quite popular. Where do you think that particular subsector is going? Do you think that is it just a bit of a flash in the pan and the shiny new thing and the way for these IP holders to realize value in some of their older content? Or do you think fast channels and essentially free-to-air digital channels are going to grow and be a major part of the TV landscape going forward?
Yeah, it's a multi-billion-dollar question, isn't it? I think some will sink and some will swim. I think as a strategy, it's the right one for now. We were talking earlier about the cost of living and inflation pressures. And so fast platforms and fast channels can offer good solutions for viewers who are experiencing subscription fatigue. Typically in America, people have 5 to 6 online streaming subscriptions, and clearly that isn't sustainable over the long term, and especially in a cost of living crisis that doesn't work. So there's a large portion of the market that is fatigued or in some cases just priced out of having these subscriptions. And so VARC and AVOD can offer a solution into that while reaching newer audiences.
Looking back and the amount of disruption, James, that we've had over the last 5 years in particular, and COVID looms very large in the rearview mirror when it comes to how things have changed, particularly for TV, and that huge rise in demand for millions and millions of people around the world when we were all locked in. Now we're obviously seeing a little bit of the release of that demand, or the dampening of that demand. And at the same time, we have this cost of living crisis. So it seems to me that the TV industry in particular is probably not going to come back to be the same sort of size industry it was pre-COVID. And I know that's a very specific question that you might not be able to answer directly, but what's your opinion on that?
I think it will evolve. So I think, the concept or the notion of linear TV will fade over time, and it will evolve into more connected TV and solutions where viewers have the option to watch exactly what they like. There was a really good debate during Cannes around, is popular culture dead? And what does that mean for brands and advertising? And a conclusion that came out of that is that popular culture probably isn't dead, but it's become far more niche, and that the future is niche. So if you look at something like YouTube, for example, you have a panoply of different creators creating different content on all manner of topics, and that can really engage a viewer who will then grow an affinity to that content. And going back to your point about, more fast TV channels growing, being launched every week. As I say, some will sink, some will swim, but by and large, that greater variety is likely to have a good hook for audiences. So this idea, I think, of mass TV, of everyone gathering around the TV set for certain events, is an old notion, with the exception of live sport, which will always draw audiences to TV. And I think the future will become more niche and more tailored for television as a channel. And obviously within that, as I mentioned earlier, more programmatic delivery of advertising based on those niche interests of that audience, which will improve targeting and theoretically improve advertising effectiveness. So, I don't think by any means it's the outlook is bleak for television as an industry. Far from it. I think the sector is undergoing a renaissance. I think it is adapting and evolving, and will continue to do so in the coming years. I mean, one thing we saw with COVID, as you mentioned, was that heightened viewing. And yes, part of that was because people were stuck at home. But I think also part of it was because people have a strong affinity for the content that they watch on television. They're heavily engaged with it. And that need for normality and comfort during a crisis period like COVID was something that TV was able to offer. So as a medium that speaks to an audience, that was a really good example of how television still cuts through in that way, even after all these decades. So yes, just to summarize, I don't think it's going anywhere. I think it will evolve, and I think it will continue to flourish in different forms in future.
And thinking about the future, James, so let's talk about where we're going to be in the next year or two, because, right now, the present is quite bleak for a lot of people. A lot of producers who are have built their businesses on supplying, premium quality content to not only streamers, but also linear broadcasters as well. They're starting to struggle a little bit as this ad crisis that the TV industry is facing really bites. Where are we going to go from here then, do you think? How do these broadcasters recover, and how might they recover, and how might we see the industry returning to a new kind of normal in the coming months and years?
Sure. And look, based on my last answer, I don't want to seem tone deaf. I fully appreciate that within the TV sector, and indeed with the industry at large, there is a lot of hardship at the moment. And that tallies very closely with economic slowdowns, particularly in the UK. So there are very, very real pressures that the sector is facing. While I feel like the long-term outlook is positive, I understand that may not come as much comfort today. To your point about the next year, I still think that content is king. I know that's quite an old adage, and it may be questionable nowadays, but I still think that that's what sings through for audiences. I appreciate this is a rather niche example, but if you look at what BBC News are doing around doubling down on fact-checking and validation, and being able to build that trust in content, in quality content, that is winning audiences from online pure players, for example. And I think doubling down, these broadcasters in particular, as you mentioned, doubling down on the quality of the content that they're able to offer, especially in a world where, anyone with a camera can just upload a piece of video content to YouTube or whatever, doubling down on premium content, which is created with world-leading teams and production staff, I think is the way that these broadcasters win. And certainly that's what advertisers are looking for. They're looking for high quality content that their brand can be seen next to. And I think that TV still offers that and will continue to offer that.
Well, that's a good sort of pointer to the future then. And in a bit more detail in terms of forecasts then, how do you see TV advertising panning out between now and the rest of the year, as we're just about halfway through 2023? And what's 2024 going to look like in terms of advertising on TV?
Revenue will be down this year in total. So, as I mentioned earlier, globally, linear spend down by about 7.4% to a total of 143 billion. And the market has only grown once over the last decade, as I mentioned earlier. Some of that is being offset by OTT and CTV channels. So, including YouTube, the market will be up by 7% to about 83 billion. And that would be a third of the total premium video market. So there is money being spent, but predominantly it's going to CTV channels. And the market as a whole will be down mildly this year. Dynamics are different all over the world, but generally speaking, in major markets like the US, the UK, and indeed China, these are the trends that we're seeing. 2024, we think, will be a recovery year, and that will be driven by a number of short-term events, to be fair. So things like political advertising in the US will have a big impact next year around the elections. Also, things like the Olympics and the Euros next year will have a big impact on brand investment on television advertising. So I think these are reasons to be cheerful. But the picture is choppy, I'd say, over the next 2 years, which, to be fair, it is for the industry at large. It's really only currently retail media, particularly the search component of retail media in the online space, that is rocketing at the moment. I think there is a bit of fatigue across the industry at large. So I wouldn't regard this necessarily as an underperformance within television. I'd see it more as a kind of a reflection of wider investment patterns.
Thank you so much. I've really enjoyed speaking with you. Some fascinating insights there, and reminder: premium content is king is what will win out in the end. So thanks very much again for your time, and I'll see you next year at Cannes Lions.
See you there. Thank you.
My next guest on this week's Cannes Lion wrap-up show is Banijay's head of branded content business, Carlotta Rossi Spencer. Hello, Carlotta. Welcome back to TellyCast.
Thank you very much, Justin. Good to be here.
It's 2 years since we last spoke, Carlotta, and there's been a lot of changes for you at Banijay. You've got a new role. Tell us about that.
Yes, I do have a new role. Thank you. Yes, but I loved speaking with you last time. So I was previously head of format acquisitions for the group, and I'm now heading a new division. Basically, we started from scratch last year in September, and it does focus on branded entertainment, meaning any kind of entertainment, any kind of content that can be suitable for brand investment. So we have already been doing a few projects within the group, but now we have this group coordination, so central coordination, which means it's, of course, me from a business development point of view. And then we have our lawyers, and then, all the support that we can have also from the finance team to get this going and running even more than it is. So we have quite a few territories working on this, most of them with dedicated teams that are within our production companies. And we are working with brands, and we want to invest more time and more energy in, finding new brands, working with agencies, working across the board with all the players in this field.
So you say you've been working on a regional focus, some territories working very successfully, I assume in branded content, but overall in terms of a group focus on this new area, this is a new role and you're heading up that new focus essentially.
Exactly. So it is about coordination. So coordinating the teams that are already doing this, as I was saying, regionally and locally across the board. So that coordination goes through, putting them together, having information travel within the group. And part of that coordination is tied to the business development, meaning when we can have briefs, when we can present projects to agencies or to brands directly, we work as a team across the board and across all territories, which is the best part of it. Meaning that if I receive a brief, that brief does go out to all our companies that are working on branded entertainment, which is a great advantage because an idea could come from anywhere. And that idea can be worked on, by our teams in any territory at any given time. So that's a great advantage with the highest possible quality in terms of creativity and then production efforts.
And obviously you have some businesses that are really experienced in doing branded work, and also we're a global world now. So some of these briefs may be local to begin with, but they could very much be a global brief as well.
Absolutely. So we do work on both ends, as you know very well, and this is our great advantage. So we have received briefs that are international, meaning, it is for a brand or for a platform or for a studio that actually wants to invest in an idea that then will go internationally. Others, for example, have started with local brands, meaning the local office of an international brand. Like, for example, the Lint example in Italy, which we did with Sky last year. And that's, of course, Lint is an international brand, but it was the Italian marketing office that decided to go with a show that was very, very successful. It's called Maître Chocolatier, and it's basically a face-off between chocolate makers. It's a talent show for chocolate makers, and it did really well for the brand. It did very well for the channel, with a tendency to get quite high audiences, considering it is an entertainment show that is branded. But at the end of the day, we are making entertainment. Audiences are attracted to good entertainment shows.
We met at Lions. What did you make of it? Was it your first trip there?
Yes, it was. The first thing, and this is very practical, is that everything happens outside the Palais at the Lions, whereas at MIPCOM, it's everything inside. So when you're there, you get the sense that everybody is outside, and the amount of business that is being done is quite phenomenal, I have to say. So the meetings are all around, not necessarily closing deals like we do sometimes at MIPCOM or MIPTV, but it is around cementing those relationships that have been growing, between agencies, between people who are making the marketing decisions. So it was quite interesting for me to see all of this happening and to see the amount of energy, I would say. It was quite fascinating. The energy that was on the Croisette is extremely fascinating. There were a lot of interesting panels to watch and to listen to. And we have a collaboration. Let's say we have a collaboration on the business side and on the communication side a little bit with Havas. So we were happy to be there with them, but we're working with everyone. So it was a great experience, I have to say.
It is very different, isn't it, to get your head around the bunker, for example, in the Palais, which we're used to being, one of the central kind of marketplaces, is completely empty other than an art exhibition. And obviously a major part of the Lions is the competitions and the awards that are given out for various different campaigns from all around the world. And that's really fascinating, just walking around that almost as an art exhibition and see all of these entries and who are the winners. But the fact that the panels are actually on these huge constructed stands all the way down the Croisette is very, very different. And you realise, you think some installations at MIPCOM are expensive, but the money on show is quite something. It always takes me aback, I think.
Yeah, and I think it gives you a sense of the magnitude of this kind of market.
Very much so. And actually, how the TV industry is just one of those medias that they're serving, and there's discussions that are happening with marketing bosses and agencies and everybody else. But it's a fascinating gathering. Coming back to branded content then, what branded content shows are you working on right now that are either regional or international? What are the secrets to success when it comes to creating branded content?
So I'll start for the second bit, because I find that, it's always hard to pinpoint the secrets of success in anything. But I do think in this business, it's really, connecting to the values of brands, because branded entertainment is not about selling a product per se. That's advertising. If I have to sell the latest product, I use advertising if I'm a brand. In this case, branded entertainment is part of a much wider marketing strategy. It could be the center of it. But that center has to really communicate on the main values of brands and on what kind of audience they need to reach. So it is fascinating for us because we come from a creative background and not an advertising background. We understand what that means, of course, but we are coming from a creativity point of view. And creativity and content lets us understand really what kind of briefs and what kind of necessities those brands need at that time. This is our main concern and our main objective when we're talking about branded. It's what does the brand really need at this time? How can we express through the content that we're able to make anywhere in the world that kind of necessity and that kind of main objective that the brand has at that moment? The success means I am catering to what you need at that moment in time with an entertaining content, with something that people will actually want to watch. Great example of this is Homecoming, which was done by Electric Robin in the UK, and it's an Amazon show. It's on Prime Video, and that was for Guinness. Now it is a story about two great singers who are traveling through their home country, and it did so well because it is a travel show in the end, and you want to watch them because they're famous and they're great and they're very funny, but you also are going through a trip, and that trip is great and it takes you to new places, and the fact that it is tied to a brand doesn't affect at all the content. So that's a key to success.
I'm trying to imagine how Guinness fits into that sort of travel show. I mean, obviously, I can imagine, creatively how it does, but how specific are a brand like Guinness when it comes to on-screen mentions and on-screen time and the product? Because that's one of the most protected brands in the world. Incredible advertising,
Yes.
Incredible marketing campaigns. All you need to see is a black and white stripe and it's like, oh, that's Guinness, and it could be painted on a wall or whatever. So when you're working with the marketing teams for a brand like Guinness, and I know every project is going to be different, but what's the balance between overt and more subtle kind of branding within a show like that?
You have to be careful to overpromise, because some brands might think you're going to see your brand and everywhere. It's not the case when you get it right with branded entertainment. Sometimes you don't even see it. In this case, it's intertwined in the story. So they are drinking sometimes, they sit down and they drink. It's like Live Italian is the same. Great show, again, for Prime Video with Bira Moretti. You watch it because it's a fun show. And, it's English celebrities traveling through Italy and discovering about some of the best food and architecture and sports that, you can find. But at the end of the day, they have a Moretti, right? And it's something that brings them together. Same with Guinness. It's not something that is in your face. They would probably have a Moretti anyway, right?
Yeah.
Because it's a beer that brings you together after a long day and you've been hot and you want a beer and you want to feel fresh. Great. When you find that kind of relationship with the brand, when they, get the fact that you are working for them, because everything that you have watched is in line with the values of Guinness and Homecoming. Everything that you have watched is in line with the values that Moretti wants to express, which is, family, getting together, being a community, being with your friends. So in your head, you're associating that brand with that good feeling that you're getting.
Yeah, it's a natural fit, isn't it? It's a natural, and in fact, it plays on emotions. And that's something that James from WARC was talking about earlier on in the show, about emotional branding. And that's something that TV can do probably better than any other advertising medium. It can bring in emotion to a show. And if a brand is sat in the middle of that, then that's the value, right?
Absolutely. It's exactly what you need to do, because what we've seen, and we don't have a lot of numbers, but we do see how many people actually stay and watch the show. But both of these shows, and also our Lint one, and also Cabello Pantene, which is Pantene, in English, which is both in Brazil and Portugal, people actually stay to watch the show. So we're talking about a 99 to a 98 percentile of people just staying and watching the whole episode, which is very high, which means it's entertaining. And at the end, we are the makers of that. And we want people to be entertained. So we can make great content for brands and still be able to entertain, which is the secret. We can go back to the secret of the success. So we are aiming towards that. And we're working on, again, just going back to, you were asking me about what we're working on. We have the fourth season, actually, season after season of the talent show, which is catered to a very young audience with Pantene in Portugal. We did 3 seasons in Brazil. It's called Cabello Pantene. We are in talks and negotiating, but we're in a good place for a second season of the Maître Chocolatier with Lint, which is quite interesting because it is in Italy. But as you were saying in the beginning, it's international brands. So we can have wider conversations. We are working on quite a few briefs at the present time, which are coming from very different kinds of brands and very different kinds of necessities. But the interesting thing is that we have producers that have very different DNAs. So we can come up with a documentary idea. We can come up with pure entertainment talent show. We can come up with a game show. We can do anything that is necessary at that point in time for that brand.
So Banijay is world's biggest independent production company. You have over 140 different producers in your stable, and the number of worldwide brands, your own show brands that are out there, is remarkable. When you're rebooting a show like Changing Rooms, for example, and bringing a brand like Dulux on board, how do you remain true to the brand Bible for Changing Rooms, but also incorporate Dulux, which has its own needs? Is it a case of the Bible can be flexible in order to incorporate a brand? Because what you're talking about is two different brands that are very heavily protected coming together there and creating something new. So how does that work?
In this case, you start from the format, and the format is what we are selling, right? So you're selling an entertainment format, and that format, as you rightly say, is protected. There's a structure to it that needs to be protected, not because it needs to be protected because we say so, but because you have to recognize it as the format that you once knew and you can go back to. So we're not going to strip away the nature of that entertainment show. As we were saying earlier, in that particular case, Dulux was probably a very good and natural fit, and it didn't change the nature of the show. It didn't change the structure of it. It just inserted itself into what the actual show is. So you're feeling that you're not getting anything that is out of place ever when you watch it. It's actually, you are going through a renovation. You can use whatever you want, but by the way, we have these great solutions for you, and there they are. But I'm still watching a show that I love. I think you can be flexible to a certain extent. You cannot insert something into a show that has been successful or is part of our catalog and change its nature, because then you have to come up with a different idea.
That's right. So they're buying into the format already, which is a known and loved format. And it's a case of, okay, we can incorporate you like this. That's the conversation, as opposed to, if that's not possible, you create something brand new.
Exactly.
Yeah. So thinking about branded content as a whole, we're talking about Cannes Line, and we're talking about advertising downturn and recession and consumer spending being down and inflation going up and energy costs going up, all of those things. How do you think that's going to affect the next few months and years of branded content? It's a new business group that you've set up within Banijay. That's a challenge, because I would imagine there's going to be more pressure on budgets from brands. So how are you going to overcome that?
Of course, there is more pressure. There's more pressure on budgets everywhere. This is undeniable. The answer to that is, which is always very interesting, branded entertainment actually solves a problem. If your budgets are lower and you still want to get to that audience and you still need to communicate, because of course, if you stop communicating, especially today, you disappear. This is why also big, gigantic brands are not stopping. You still have a lot of advertising on the brands that we all know very well and we probably grew up with. The reason being for the strength of branded entertainment is A, it is not as costly as you would think. And actually, the return on that is immense, because you are probably thinking about, let's say you do a long form documentary. That long form documentary will be on the platforms for a very long time. It will attract the attention of people through time. I'm not going against at all, because we all work together. And for us, the positioning is we are supporters and we're allies to advertisers and agencies and everyone. Of course, you still have the 30 seconds, the 60 seconds. Those are great. The interesting bit about branded is that you have time to tell your story. And that telling your story doesn't necessarily imply spending millions. It implies spending the right amount for that production of that level on a certain platform. But it will stay and people will watch it and people will talk about it. So the difference is you can spend, more money in trying to attract people by, your usual methods, but you could also add the possibility of telling a story that is wider, that reaches to more people, that is actually staying, right there on the platform when you want to watch it. Great example of this is Mind Games with ASICS on our end, which is a documentary. It's on, great sports champions. It's a high-end documentary that people are watching continuously, and that Prime Video has put in 55 territories to date, because it's been so successful and it's out there, and it's something, it's not about here's our latest shoes, but it's about what makes a great athlete different. And by the way, we're there. It is quite interesting to adopt branded entertainment when you're in a place where you have a story to tell. And most of these brands do.
So it actually can be about reinforcing brand rather than selling a particular product. And exactly. When that's the case, you mentioned 55 territories, actually that can be activated by a brand in 55 different territories. So the value, I suppose internally within a brand or a media agency, you're looking at budgets, pulling budgets from one area to another, because this is a bigger concept that can be the center of a campaign rather than it just being purely short form ads or...
Exactly. It could be the center of a digital campaign. It could be the center of more things. You can use it as your center content and then use it in different ways.
We've seen a lot of brands starting to divert money into digital first projects that live on socials first and foremost. So, for example, lots of content creators are now got professional studios, and they're monetizing their audiences by creating content for their audiences, but that's brand funded as well. Is that something that we might see Banijay Group moving into in the future?
I think like with all changes, you have to embrace them. We are looking at also how to use our brands more in the digital space. In terms of working for brands in the digital arena, we do some already. We've been doing, especially out of Brazil and Latin America in general, we've been working a lot with certain brands like Samsung, but only on digital platforms. And that is very interesting, because if that brand needs to have a certain content that reaches a demographic, that demographic might just be on digital. So we have done shows that are, not necessarily your 25 minutes, your 45, 60, it's like shorter versions, 6 to 8 minutes, but they're very focused on the kind of audience we need to reach. So yes, we're already starting that, and I'm sure it will be growing.
Good luck with that, Carlotta. It was great to see you out in Cannes. Remarkable event, as it always is. What's the next project that you're looking at working on that you can talk about, of course?
I can't really talk about the brands, but we're working on a couple of briefs that are quite large and could encompass more territories. That's my goal.
Okay, got it. Carlotta, thank you so much for joining us. Really great to speak with you. Good luck with the new division, and we'll keep our eyes peeled for what's coming out from Banijay Group in the branded content space soon. Thanks a lot for joining us.
Fantastic. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Well, that's it from Cannes. Thanks for listening to the show. We'll be back in town in October for this year's MIPCOM. TellyCast is edited by Ian Chambers and was recorded in Cannes. Next week's show comes from Toledo in Spain, where we'll be covering the connector fiction and entertainment market, where around 1,000 TV industry execs will gather for the 7th edition of the event, which features panel discussions, meetings, award ceremonies and more, connecting industry and talent, fiction and entertainment, Europe and the Americas. Until then, stay safe.